Hi. Hi. So this is a quick reminder video about the minor arcanas in tarot, their meaning and how to think about them in a really broad and quick way. So we are going to start with swords. So swords are about mental models, ideas, knowledge, what's in your brain, like the chatter in your head. So self-image, judgment of the world, opinions, anything of that sort. It's not unlike the map that exists inside of your thoughts about how you think reality is. And so, pragmatically speaking, if swords come up in a reading, it's typically about self reflection, uh, learning opportunities, learning journeys. Are your ideas in line with how the world actually works? And so, if you get challenged on swords, it might be an invitation to either think more clearly, clean up your mind, uh, make sure that your brain is along for the journey, which I think in a lot of metaphysical, esoteric circles, the brain is treated as the enemy. In this case, it's an invitation to be intelligent about things and to include your mind in the process. So, low swords, low numbers like 1, 2, 3 would typically point to something like underdeveloped ideas, either misunderstanding, lack of information, lack of clarity, and then high swords is when your thoughts match the world really well. And then 9 and the crisis stuff is like overthinking. In the elemental correspondences, you would have this would be air. Color wise, light blue or yellow are commonly used to symbolize this principle. Also, I guess, kind of like skin color, lots of very light colors. And other symbols that can match this, if it's swords would be like the head, uh, human head and or brain, skull. Symbols of air, the eye, or like a light bulb. These typical cultural symbols for intelligence. Okay. Moving on to cups. So cups are water, they are emotions, relationships, but I would say mostly that cups are about love and the capacity to love and the understanding of the divergent different types of love that exist. And so, yes, relationships, others, and feelings in general, but it's somewhat interesting, I would argue, to look at all emotions, let's say in relationship to love. So if you have a disgust response, then it's highlighting the way in which the thing that is triggering a disgust response, is different from love. And it's like it helps you sort of triangulate and get a better sense of, let's say, the specificity of what this disgust figure is actually pointing to. I recommend to try to remember the ways in which it points to something relevant to love for a while. So if you, for example, have an anger response to something, then perhaps it's whatever the trigger is threatening something that you love, right? So low count on cups is either emotional immaturity or mixing emotions together. So think about it. If your emotional responses are water and you have few cups, let's say you have 1 cup, then all of your emotions get mixed into this one soup, and you can't distinguish one thing from another. So at the beginning, a good way to think about the early journey in general, like 1, 2, 3, for all minor arcanas, is to think about like teenagers, for example. Like the intensity can be very high, but the sophistication of the clarity of what the differences are is really low. So, a teenage emotional response is like really high reactivity, no clarity as to specifically which emotions are being triggered and why. So that's low cups, and then a higher cups is more emotional clarity and intelligence, a strong capacity to be able to hold love, because the cup is the idea that love comes and then gets poured into the cups, and then if your cups are functioning properly, then you can hold the love in place, and you differentiate them quite well. So you could have an emotional response to a thing and then know which one it is, and then let's say direct the flow to the right cup. And a broken relationship to cups is like if your cups were to have leaks in them. So if you are incapable of holding on to love, like you have an experience, you have a loving experience that could fill you up, but then within 24 hours you get back to feeling emotionally empty, then you have holes in your cups, so your cups don't hold water. So pragmatically speaking, if that comes up in a reading, it'll be an invitation to either feel yourself or the way I typically like to think about it is to either reflect on the aspect of love relevant to what is happening in the reading, or it's an invitation to like cultivate love, like activate love. So find the loving path to this specific thing, and then depending on the number, the path is different. Um, and so cultivating love with other people or with yourself, right? So, okay, color association, deep blue, water, the ocean, very simple. Other corresponding symbols to cups, yeah, water, the heart. Um, there's a lot of entanglement symbols, as in, to point towards relationships, and like, these things, like this symbol here, this shape. Yeah, so that could be a loving symbol. Let's go for that. Yeah, that's about it. Anything else? I don't think so. All right, moving on. Um, Pentacles. Pentacles are superficially about money. More interestingly, you have to diversify your model of what wealth and let's say like opportunities means. So if in a capitalist world, we tend to reduce the idea of value to money. So the more money you have, the more capacity. It's like energy, right? We've heard this metaphor before. It's like the more energy you have, the more potential you have access to. So that's true. And there's a whole bunch of other forms of wealth in your life that that are not only symbolized by money. So a lot of the resources you have access to, houses and vehicles and whatever else you use regularly, are forms of wealth in your life. And they can be forms of wealth, as in it could be an investment that you're not actively using, but you put wealth into it and it's just sort of waiting there to be sold. So in a way, that's a form of potential. But more typically, for most people, the more important forms of wealth are going to be the ones with which you interact with regularly. So you'll be conscious of the way in which this specific form of wealth is permitting you this specific form of freedom. So, having access to a kitchen gives you the capacity to cook food and to be healthy and to et cetera, feed yourself and your family. Having access to a house gives you a sense of security. Having access to a vehicle helps you make the world a lot smaller. But then we could continue complexifying our ideas about wealth to turn it into like some relationships give you access to certain forms of wealth that you would otherwise not have access to. So I have a friend who has a cottage that I get to go to because of their connection. So there's wealth relevant to that relationship. So it's all the ways in which material stuff within your environment gives you capacity for things. If we use the gardening metaphor to be able to think this through, it looks something like the fertile soil. You spend a bunch of time taking care of the garden, but what your intended outcome is for the soil itself, or the garden itself, to be fertile so that things can grow in it. You're not responsible for doing the growing. The best you could do is to take care of the conditions. And once the conditions are right, then potential emerges from this form of wealth. Another analogy that could work is if you want to dance in your life, well, you'll need a few things to be able to successfully get to the capacity to dance. One is you need a healthy body that has enough mobility for you to be able to move with it. Then you need access to a space that permits you to move freely, and then the more reliable the space is, like the safer the space is, the more you can sort of abandon yourself to the practice of dance without a fear that either the floor will give out, or you'll step on something sharp or something like that. And so access to that space is a form of wealth, right? So elemental correspondence is earth. So the fertile ground metaphor again. Other symbols, yeah, so like money, diamonds, rocks, these sorts of things. I also typically use the symbol of like a small little mound of earth with like a little sprout coming out. So the sprout isn't the pentacles, but the fertile land is. And, to create symbology, sometimes you have to kind of exaggerate the symbol so it looks something like that. Yeah, crystals, etc., etc., etc. Color correspondence, gold. But I find that the gold fits better in the mind, so the lightness of thought. So, like gold and yellow is a bit too close. So I tend to go more for like deep forest greens and colors that, or brown, colors that invoke rich ecosystems. Because oh yeah, another way of thinking about this, going back to the beginning about the list of synonyms, is like context and ecosystem. I think that those two are very useful for this. Pragmatically, when this comes up in a reading, it's an invitation to reflect on your forms of wealth. For most people, it is an invitation to complexify and diversify your mental models about what wealth is. So it's essentially an invitation to identify forms of wealth that you would otherwise either take for granted or you forget that you have access to. So, who do you know that could help you have access to this, for example, is very typical when you pull a card that's like 5 and above, more like 6 and above. Oh yeah, low numbers in Pentacles is like the poverty trap, the feeling that you don't have enough to be able to for the things that you have they don't multiply your potential. Really low numbers like 2 and 3 might sometimes even be like feelings of disempowerment and feeling stuck in the inability to rely on the things that you have. And then the high numbers are more about like abundance, overflow, even the capacity to give at some point is very important. And then the crisis scale, the 9, is more about like hoarding, obsession, overfixation, and things like that. So yeah, last one is wands. So wands are about action. They're about doing. They're about willpower. They're about force. They're about art, creativity, sexuality. Yeah, like generating children. Anything that emerges out of your existence. Anything that essentially will grow beyond you is relevant to wands. So in a really superficial way, you'll think you'll cross this symbol, or like this pattern, let's say, in life through artists, entrepreneurs, the really willful people. I think willpower is the best way to think about this. Although you can say creativity, I feel like creativity, linguistically speaking, is sort of it's sort of reserved for artists, which is not exactly So yeah, willpower is a bit easier for people to get to understand. The elemental correspondence is fire. So fire is extremely active, destructive, get out of my way, like there's a doing thing there. The people in your life that are fire-like are typically leaders. They're very self-authored, and they take up a lot of space. They're not shy, things like that. Um, so low count on wands is something like feeling disempowered, um, sort of like erased people who easily feel encroached upon, and you see the movement that I'm doing, sort of like held back within themselves. High wands are very outgoing, and there's a lot of doing, and there's a lot of fearlessness about offering to the world, and yeah, like in your environment, the wand people are the people you want to ask to. You want to ask when you don't know what to do on a Friday or Saturday night. They'll have plans, and they'll just say, "Oh yeah, we're doing this." And then if they act as if they if they act as if you'll just follow, very high, very high wands. And if you do it too much, again, crisis area is arrogance and control, just like stifling other people's freedoms. It's like you're just so overbearing with your own personality that other people feel like there's no space for themselves. And so, yeah, color correspondence is red, mostly bright red. Yeah, and then other symbols, so wands, so things that grow, plants, nature, anything of that sort, fire, and like magic, just like sparkly little twirly things, it's this general area. So yeah, the order of the minor arcanas is as I listed them. So tarot proposes, and I don't want to come here with a claim of authority saying that this is how reality works. I just think that this is a really interesting proposition that tarot has, is that it cycles between the mind, so swords, two cups, love, two wealth, pentacles, two wands, willpower, and then two brain again. So if we use the garden metaphor, if you start at the pentacles, for example, you buy land. The first thing you do is like you try. So you have the land, so it's pentacles, and then you go to the wands, you try something. You're just like, oh, I'm going to plant things, whatever. You don't know what you're doing. And then depending on the results of these actions, you then have an opportunity to learn something about the land. So you then analyze what you did, and you make a better plan. So, oh, this didn't work, too shady, or the soil is too acidic, whatever. And so once you have a plan, then you need your love, you need your cups to be able to activate and take care of the land, right? So it's like a loving action. You use your love to be able to be in a caring, gentle, generative relationship with the land. And then once you've done some of that, the land becomes more fertile. So pentacles, it like grows in capacity. And the more fertile it is, the more growing happens. The more potential is unleashed. So that's the willful wand part. And then through this increased potential, then you learn more things, and you could cycle through these. And so, and then the major arcanas emerge from these four sort of interfaces, these four sort of mundane aspects of self interfacing with the world. So a good way to think about this is if your minors are completely out of balance, you're very wealthy, but you're very emotionally underdeveloped. Then what it does is it's not unlike the land under a river. So if the land is uneven and water is flowing on top, what you get is you get a lot of turbulence on the surface. And so if the water is rushing and there's a lot of turbulence, then the surface of the water becomes very troubled, and it'll captivate your attention. It'll be like most of your energy will be spent just dealing with the superficial stuff, the surface of the water. And at the same time, because the water is really troubled, you can't see through it. But if you relatively balance out your minors, which is, in a way an idealized impossible task, but we do what we can. If you relatively balance out your minors, then the water is more calm and appeased. And then if it is, then the surface becomes calm. And then you could see through your minors to then have access to your more transcendental, metaphysical aspects of your existence, which could be spirituality and I guess like archetypes of self, and then the whole cycle of self-transformation, which can take like 10 years. So on one hand, we could say that one of the invitations is to become knowledgeable about how the minors work, so as to have a better relationship with them, so as to just be at least more knowledgeable about your day-to-day and what's affecting you. And then you can also try to balance them out as much as possible, figure out where your weak links are, invest in the right places. And then if you do, you have a more fluid and regular capacity to engage with spiritual aspects of your life, essentially, which can give you a sense of meaningfulness that's more transcendental than just dealing with the stuff that is keeping you busy. So, good enough for now. All right, let's do that.